My name is Don Moore. I am faculty at UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business. My primary area of research examines human judgment, biases to which human judgment is vulnerable, and the degree to which people are confident in, sometimes overconfident in, the quality of their own judgment. Yeah, there's a long stream of research going back in psychology documenting the vulnerabilities of human judgment and the many ways in which algorithmic judgments, linear models, computers can improve on some of the foibles, frailties, and biases to which human judgment is vulnerable. And that research stream ran in parallel for a long time with a consensus in the field that people were suspicious of linear models and algorithmic judgment, that they didn't want to defer their decisions to a machine, that they wanted to have control, even when that meant impairing the quality of the decision. Most of the time people thought their judgment was better. They were reluctant to trust an algorithm with decisions, but the consensus in the field reigned for a very long time that people didn't want to delegate their decisions to a machine. Most of the support for the idea that people didn't want to delegate their decisions to machines arose from experts, physicians, attorneys, judges, who, when given the opportunity to inform their opinions with the input of algorithms, would decline to do so, that they resisted the influence of algorithmic inputs into their decisions. Part of what is involved in building expertise is accumulating experience that often underscores faith in one's own judgment. And that faith is imperfectly correlated with actual increase in the accuracy of one's judgment. So there's evidence from a few quarters suggesting that as people grow in experience, as they do more in their field, as they survive longer, they grow more and more confident in the accuracy of their own judgment. That occurs even in places where those experienced professionals lack the experience to actually get better. The example I think of is police officers who become, over the courses of their careers, more confident in their ability to detect lies. So they become more sure that they know when a suspect is lying to them. In fact, police officers don't get very good feedback. They don't get better at detecting lies. And so they just become more overconfident over the course of their careers. So the title actually does come from the inspiration of a particular other paper. Algorithm Aversion is a paper. The lead author, Berkeley Dietvorst, is a very smart guy, faculty at the University of Chicago, that highlights some of the ways in which people grow more suspicious of algorithms than human advisors. In particular, algorithms, when they fail, induce more skepticism, that when people see an algorithm err, they are less forgiving than when they see a human make mistakes in their judgment. No, it is exactly that. It's more brittle. So despite the title of that paper, Algorithm Aversion, they in fact replicate the key result that we present in my paper with Julia Minson and Jen Log, which is that at baseline, people do weight input from an algorithmic advisor more heavily than from a human advisor. In modern society, we have grown very comfortable delegating our decisions to algorithms or accepting advice from algorithmic advisors. Everything from how to drive to what restaurants to go to are informed by online advisors. And so it's possible there's been change over time. We don't have the data to answer that question. So we have not conducted a longitudinal study in which we track the development of people's receptivity to algorithmic advice. What we did do was study people's willingness to accept algorithmic advice and adjust their opinions in light of it. And we did compare novices with experts and found that experts were more reluctant, more skeptical. So in that sense, we do confirm the received wisdom in the field, suggesting that experts are skeptical of algorithmic advisors, but we don't replicate the universal claim that people never want to delegate their decisions to a machine. In fact, we found that people, as a rule, are quite receptive to input from a linear model or from an algorithm in adjusting their own opinions. Now there's an important caveat there. The participants in our studies, when they showed greater receptivity toward advice from an algorithm, they weren't relinquishing control. They were adjusting their own views in light of the useful advice that they got. They weren't empowering the algorithm to make the decision for them. The innovation for which Jen Log, the lead author on the paper, gets the lion's share of the credit is using an approach that's been used in judgment in a number of other papers, the judge advisor system paradigm, in which the participant first offers their own estimate of some quantity. And we used all sorts of things, everything from forecasting the performance of new music releases to forecasting geopolitical events to estimating uncertain quantities. And we first had our participants make their own estimate, then we offered advice, and then saw how much they updated their beliefs in light of the advice. If they updated such that their opinion moved closer to the advice from their prior, that indicated they were weighting the advice more heavily. And what we found was that when we told them the advice came from an algorithm, they weighted it more heavily than when we told them that the advice came from a person. In all conditions, the advice was actually the same. It was pretty good advice, but simply changing the label affected the way that it influenced the decision maker. Algorithms are making inroads as artificially intelligent systems become more and more capable, capitalize on the ever greater availability of data to inform their judgments. So there are lots of domains in which human decisions can benefit from the wisdom and quality of algorithmic inputs. In thinking about the limitations of those algorithmic inputs, it's worth really thinking about how algorithms do their work and what they can tell us and what they can't. The broad consensus that the field is developing is a revision to the simple idea that algorithms are always better, but that people resist them. There are domains in which algorithms can be helpful for making routine decisions with high-quality quantitative inputs that are useful for training the algorithm. When there are subjective elements to the decision that require human judgment to quantify, then a human decision maker will always be essential. It's also useful to have a human decision maker involved to avoid some of the disastrous ways that simple algorithmic judgments can go off the rails. And we've seen some of that with Google learning to identify pictures or learning how to engage in human conversation based on some very unfortunate examples that it picks up off the web. So the internet has some very dark and nasty corners, and when it learns how to caption pictures of African Americans, when Google's image algorithm, the image identification algorithm, learns how to caption pictures of African Americans from those nasty, racist, neo-Nazi websites, then what we see in the results from image searches on Google will not be consistent with the human values that Google would seek to enact, and a human judge is essential in those circumstances to censor, to adjust, to correct. some of the products of simple algorithmic analyses? It's a great question, and it makes complete sense that it should. That's part of why people's attitude toward algorithms has changed over time as folk theories about what they do changes. It is notable that the understanding the internal workings of an algorithm, we assume that should be responsive, that people's assessment of algorithms should be responsive to their beliefs about what's going on inside. The human case, however, is equally problematic. To what extent do we really know what's going on inside the mind of the human advisor who's telling us what they think? And do we understand their biases and their idiosyncrasies in a way that would give us insight into the potential flaws of the advice that they're giving us?
Well, I guess you could maybe distinguish between two issues there. One is the black box issue of machine learning, but you can still have a folk theory of what machine learning is and therefore like how it learns from data in some abstract sense. And then there's just not actually knowing. Then there's a literal black box of I have no idea what this thing is and how it functions and how it would learn and anything like that. I don't know if that's a distinction that ends up being relevant, but
yeah, in some ways it's even more striking in the human case, where you really can't have access to the other person's mind, and in some ways they can't have access into their own minds either. There's so much of the way that we form our intuitive judgments and the way emotions influence our decisions that operates at an unconscious level and that humans don't have self-insight into. But we fool ourselves into imagining that we do understand our own decisions, and so can imagine that our insight into our own minds is useful for helping us understand other minds and the advice that other people give us. Algorithms seem more mysterious, and sometimes that mystery comes with a sense of awe that this amazing mechanism can produce such useful advice. But that mystery should, I think, add to our suspicion, especially for machine learning systems that actually can't articulate how it is that they form their judgments, or how they learn, or how they weight the variables in providing advice. I think your question is spot on, that we have too often thought of this problem of decision-making as human versus machine and a race to try to pick a winner. And the reality is that a human-machine combo, the cyborg, is the one that's going to win this race. So when I talk about this in class, I show a picture of RoboCop and recommend my students hire that agent. You want the human-machine combo working together to capitalize on the strengths of each, and ideally a system that protects from the greatest weaknesses of each, because human judges and algorithms each have their own distinct strengths and weaknesses that complement each other. It is, as you note, routine for us to ascribe animus to human judgments that discriminate on the basis of, say, race. It is therefore distressing to find that the algorithmic systems that we build for hiring or decisions of creditworthiness wind up discriminating on the basis of race when the programmers did not intend that. That result ought to shine a somewhat different light on the discrimination that human systems so often produce without intending to do so. And I think the implication there is that the systems built into our society that discriminate in so many ways can produce discriminatory outcomes as a result of decision-making processes that don't explicitly include race. I mean, one small example, if you include zip code as a predictor for creditworthiness, but you explicitly omit race in a segregated society, you can nevertheless wind up with a system that discriminates on the basis of race, where zip code serves as its proxy. And so it turns out that so in principle, it ought to be able to be possible to build an algorithmic system that avoids some of the human prejudices on topics like race or gender. And egalitarians ought to favor those systems. Algorithms have gotten a bit of a bad name on that subject because of the surprising results of algorithms built with the intention of not discriminating that effectively wind up discriminating because of proxy variables, as I mentioned, like zip code. Can algorithms help create a more just society and correct for some of the structural biases and inequities that are present in our society? I think the answer to that is a tentative yes, acknowledging that it's complicated. So to pick one modest example, there's been concern recently in many quarters about ways in which standardized tests like the SAT can unintentionally discriminate on the basis of race or culture. If we're using SAT scores to decide who to admit to America's best universities, we ought to be concerned about the way, if there's some unintentional discrimination built in there. Okay, well, if we can figure out how much they discriminate and therefore underestimate the scholastic aptitude of applicants from minority cultures, can we adjust the scores estimated for those people? It would be easy to include such a fudge factor in an algorithm's admission decision. Well, so to what degree is that affirmative action, and to what degree are we comfortable with a fixed fudge factor that we build in to favor minority applicants? It's these sort of complicated questions around affirmative action, bias, adjustment. How much do you adjust for societal structural inequities? How much of a disadvantage is it to grow up black in America? And can you translate that into points on the SAT? Algorithms force us to confront the details of decisions in ways that vague human judgments can sort of skirt around. And in that way, algorithms challenge us to get serious about our decision making by being clear. I think both of those worries are valid. I think we cannot delegate decisions to algorithms and proceed blithely forward as if we can be sure that the algorithm will never mess up. No, it will. Machines are overconfident for some of the same reasons that humans are overconfident. And we should always be on guard for errors. The human-machine combo, the cyborg, is a winning combination because machines are by and large less prone to error than humans, but when they err, they can often err catastrophically, and people will be well positioned to catch those gross mistakes. To what degree do I worry about the atrophy of human decision making? To some degree. I mean, I can think of stories, some of which are actually quite funny, about the mistakes that people make when they blindly trust an algorithm, like the person who drives their car into the lake because the way that Google Maps had that route mapped, it seemed to invite them to drive that direction, or they drive right through a traffic signal because Google Maps didn't tell them to stop or whatever. That people can make really dumb errors when they leave their own judgment aside and blindly follow the advice of an imperfect algorithm. I guess I would say a few words about the value of humans cultivating an intimate familiarity with their machine colleagues, that there's enormous value in even gaining a little bit of insight into machine learning and data science and the ways that machine algorithmic systems produce advice that we follow. Understanding the guts of those systems can help us calibrate our confidence in their accuracy. They are far from perfect. They will make mistakes, and understanding how they work will help us anticipate those mistakes.